As rail fans, we perhaps have a tendency to romanticize working on the railroad, and engineers in particular capture our imagination. In this episode of Legacies, we talk with three retired locomotive engineers and learn about the ups and downs of life on the railroad. Welcome, gentlemen. It's really a great pleasure to have you here on the show, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. We have with us today two retired former engineers, plus John Springer, who is also a retired former engineer. John, maybe you could go around and introduce everybody for us, please.
Sure. Below me is Rich Del Bono, and he's a Zone 2 engineer. He worked west of Penn Station, and I got to meet him in Penn Station on his layovers. He's a former serviceman, and he used to talk with my dad and I down there. Rich also taught us a class when it came time for recertification in Boston. Did a great job, and that's really when we got to know each other. Charlie, I re-met through a railroad lunch that he runs, mostly Metro North people, and we get together once a month and chew the fat for several hours and tell railroad stories. And Charlie is a former Metro North engineer who hired out before that Penn Central, and you hired out on the New Haven as a maintainer or something, Charlie?
Yeah, I had various jobs. I started as a call boy, went over into signal maintainer, and then got laid off by Penn Central and went firing shortly after that. Yeah.
Okay. And John, introduce yourself since you're a part of the group here.
Okay. I'm the son of a telegrapher leverman, and I got to grow up on the railroad in Towers with my father over on the New York Central side. And in 1970, I hired out, and I retired in 2012 from Amtrak. Ran trains on the Naugatuck Railroad for 5 years, and now I volunteer in the Switch Tower Museum. Okay. And I have a great interest in railroad history as well as talking to the other guys about all their experience.
You know, when I was a boy growing up in the 1950s, it seemed like that everybody that I knew wanted to be a train engineer. That was their big dream, was to be a train engineer. Well, you guys did it. So I'd like to hear from each of you how you got started in railroading and how you became an engineer. So Charlie, let's start with you.
Rich, did you want to go first? Because
yeah, Rich is on a time limit.
Okay, all right, fine. Rich?
I appreciate that, gentlemen. Thanks. So shortly after I got out of the military, I kicked around in heavy construction, and I was a brick and block layer cement finisher, and it was killing me. I was running heavy equipment, and I was trying to get a job and something that I could work at, 365 days a year. So my neighbor, who I happened to go to high school with, lived across the street from me, and his whole family was a railroad. His father, his grandfather, and him. And they were engineers hired by Pennsylvania Railroad and then Penn Central. And I was telling my dilemma, and I said, I'd like to get a job. I don't know where to go, who to talk to. He says, well, the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Line is looking to hire one fireman. I said, oh, I'll give it a shot. And then I went down there with my military veterans preference, and I got hired as a fireman off the street. So I started with the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Line, which was jointly owned by the Pennsylvania Railroad and the Reading Railroad. So it was 2/3 Pennsy and 1/3 Reading. So hence the Pennsylvania Reading Seashore Line. And we handled everything from Camden south of New Jersey all the way to Cape May Point. And that's where I got my start. I started out as a fireman, and I said, wow, this isn't a bad job. It was like a little boy's dream come true. And my father told me, he didn't tell me a lot of stuff in my life, but he told me, you get a good job, a job that you like, and you'll never work a day in your life. And he was absolutely, totally right. And I'm sure most of my colleagues will agree with me. Mm-hmm. It's a good job. Yeah, you got your ups and downs. You got your lousy weather conditions, but it's part of the job. But I thoroughly enjoyed my career, all 34 years of it. I met some wonderful people I'm still in touch with today. I consider them my brothers. John Springer is one of them.
Great. How about you, Charlie?
Mine was a little different. I left high school, and my father said, you're not working on the railroad. You're going to get an education. So I put 2 years in and a business school in Albany and finished. And I knew then and there, I just did not want to sit behind a desk the rest of my life. So finishing up there, I somehow found out the New Haven Railroad was looking for people. And so I snuck down there into the Bronx, and the woman said, well, we need brakemen up in Waterbury, Connecticut, which I had no idea where that was. And she said, we need a call boy in Oak Point Yard. And I said, well, where's that? And she said, the Bronx. I said, oh. So I said, sign me up. So and we'll find out I'm sitting behind a desk. I said, this isn't what I want to do. So after about 2 months, I went down and saw her name was Mary, very nice woman. I said, Mary, this isn't what I wanted to do in my life. She said, well, we need a lamp man in the signal department. I said, I have no idea what that is, but it's outside. She said, yes. I said, I'll take it. And basically it was oil and switches and filling kerosene lamps in the yard. And I said, well, it's outside. I'm in the fresh air. And I said, I'll try that. And so for a year, I worked in Oak Point Yard, filling kerosene lamps and oiling and graphiting the switches. And I was my own boss. I had my work and did it every day. Then I come to find out there was 28 maintainers in the New York terminal. I shouldn't say just Oak Point Yard. It was Harlem River Yard. And when Penn Central come in January 1st, 69, and in April, 26 men got laid off. They kept 2 men. I was number 27, so guess where I was, out in the street. So my father finally said, well, you want to work on the railroad? And he knew the chief road foreman on this. Well, it was the New York Central, but now it was Penn Central. So he said, they're going to hire firemen in July. He says, I'll get you a job. So in July of 69, I got a fireman job on the Hudson Division. And the rest was history after that. I started working in 72nd Street and never got laid off again. For my 37 some odd years in this. And a couple of years later, I qualified as an engineer. So, and like Rich said, never worked a day after that.
That's right.
And John, I know you got an early start in railroading from your father, but how did how did you end up actually becoming a railroad employee? What was your story?
Just like Charlie's father said to him, my parents were adamant that I was never going to work on the railroad. My father didn't want me working 2 jobs. He had to work 2 jobs to support us. And he was adamant I was to go to college and get an education and never be on the railroad. By the time I was 16, which was shortly after the Penn Central merger, they knew it was hopeless. I wanted a job on the railroad. I was doing terrible in school. And so when the Penn Central came in, you had to be 18 to get a job. I don't know how old Charlie was when he got those jobs. But prior to that time, they would hire you at 16 to be a call boy or a clerk someplace. So they said, you got to stick it out 2 more years. And so I had to finish high school. And I did finish high school. And I'm very proud to say that on my graduation night, I was working a switcher down at 72nd Street as a fireman, sitting over there in the left seat. The engineer said, boy, you seem very happy. Yep, I said, I hated school, and tonight my class is graduating, and I'm right here, right where I always wanted to be. And in a few years, I know I'll be an engineer. My parents were very disappointed. They wanted to see me on that stage, and but that never happened. Matter of fact, my mother had to go up and get my diploma about a week after that. They bought me a gold pocket watch as a gift, and they wouldn't give me the watch until they saw the diploma. And my mother went up and picked up the diploma, and they gave me my pocket watch, which I use today. And that's, I hired out on my birthday, which was a little bit before school got out. And I got on the roster. Back in those days, it was when you had your physical. So I made the roster and booked on and didn't work 2 weekends. And then school was finally over, and I was on the Hudson Division, like Charlie, working out of 72nd Street. And I got laid off right after Labor Day of 1970. And that's how I ended up in New Haven temporarily. But I liked the work up there. We went in all different directions: Boston, Selkirk, Penn Station, Grand Central. We had lots and lots of work. And it was a great opportunity. And so I decided to stay there. And in a couple of years after that, in 73, I met my wife, and we settled in. And That's where I stayed. And when they broke up the railroads in '83, as these two guys will tell you, you had to make a decision where you were going to go. Either Metro North, the commuter operation, Conrail, or Amtrak. And I was on Metro North, and I was the first one to quit. It was going to be years before I could work out in New Haven. So I quit, and I went back to Conrail. And I worked about a year on Conrail, and then I'd go over to Amtrak for 6 months. And I went back and forth till I could hold a regular run on Amtrak in the fall of '87, and I stayed there. And that's where I retired from.
Probably wasn't the best idea for your father to be taking you to the towers when you were a little kid if he didn't want you to go into railroading.
Well, we had a car accident. A drunk woman hit us head on. And my father had just built his house, him and my mother. My mother got messed up, had to go to the hospital, and she was laid up for a while. He had no money for a babysitter. There was no family up that way. So he took me to the railroad with him, and I would sit up in the tower, watch the trains go by, and go to sleep in a chair, and then he'd wake me up at midnight, and I'd go home with him. I got to like that. And on the railroad, as these two fellows will tell you, very few people have weekends off. It takes a long time to have weekends off.
Mm-hmm.
For 14 years, he had Tuesday and Wednesday off, all while I was mainly growing up. So Saturday became our day, and he would take me to work with him, and I'd get to spend a day with him on, in the tower on the job, and we'd have pizza or something on the way home, and that was our time together. I lived all week for that one day a week. So it might not have been a good idea, but as a father, that was the only time he could spend with me. And Tuesday and Wednesday night, we got to watch TV together. The rest of the time, I didn't see him.
All right. John, you had sent me a note that said Rich can do the South Philly shuffle, along with the story of the conductors that would do it. What's that about, Rich?
Well, a lot of the guys, one particular fellow in particular that I think about, I don't know if I can name him. Well, he's retired now. His name's Joe Lahart. He was a 70-year-old teenager, if you understand what I was. He was a guy that hung out on the street, the street corner guys, that's the kind of guy that he struck me as. And most of the guys had this certain kind of walk to identify them. And I think it's indigenous to Philadelphia, but maybe somebody else has a similar situation. But he just had this kind of shuffle. He used to walk like the shuffle. And I said, I don't walk like that. That's the way I walk. So when I was doing the classes in front of John, the recertification classes, I said, I introduced him to the South Philly Shuffle. And I would walk in front of the class and just to get a laugh and loosen the guys up. But John, he cracked up about it. So, and then it's what I've been hankered with this rest of my life since I've known him, is the guy with the South Philly Shuffle. It's just a way that you walk, Like it depicts you from a normal guy to a wise guy, I guess is the best way I could depict it. It's funny. It was comical.
John was saying that we had 160 years worth. Well, I guess without Twiggy, we're a little shy of 160 years worth of experience here. But tell me about some of the experiences that you had while you were working on the railroad. Interesting things that happened to you, funny stories, that kind of thing.
Me, you're talking?
Yeah, me? Rich, we'll start with you, just since your time is limited.
Well, I don't know what area. I've got so many stories. I mean, good and bad, and
Well, let's start with a good story.
Well, it was a little boy's dream come true. I got promoted to engineer. It was after about a year that I was a fireman, and then took the test and all that and got promoted. But like I said, it was a small railroad. And I thought I was it. I said, wow, this is great. And I really enjoyed my job. Every day was different. You went in, especially when you're working the extra list. You didn't know what was going to happen. You got called for a job, you went in, and you let the chips fall where they may. And it was always something new, it was something different. All the crews that you work with had their individual personalities, and some of them were comical as hell. I mean, it really unbelievable. And then some of them, you wonder how they actually can put one foot in front of the other. But like I said, in my course of my career, I met some wonderful, wonderful people. When I was in the military, the guys that you were in the trenches with, They were your shipmates. I was in the Navy. They were your family. And that was a close bond. It's the same thing that I felt. I can only speak for myself as when I was in the railroad. It's the same camaraderie. Everybody watches out for everybody. Watches your back because it's a dangerous industry. And I have a very tight, close bond with the people I'm still in contact with. And I feel as though they're my family. John specifically, he's been to my home and broke bread with us many times, including his pets. And I welcome any of my brothers that want to come and visit. My door's always open to them. And that's how I feel, very strongly. There's all members of my own family I don't really give a shit if I ever see again. But my railroad brothers and my military shipmates, absolutely.
Tell us about something bad that happened while you were working.
Well, feeling the way I was feeling, wow, this is great. What a job. I run an engine. I sit on my ass all day looking out the window. My teacher used to say, you'll never get a job looking out the window. Well, guess what? That's what I got paid to do, look out the window. The first bad taste in my mouth was my first fatal. I was called to fire helper service. We were out pushing trains all night. And so at the last, cut off the last train, we were heading back to Camden Engine House light. And this was, and I remember it to the day, it was December 19th, just before Christmas, was a Merchant Street crossing in Audubon. And that's 40-mile-an-hour railroad at the time. So we were doing 30 miles an hour because we had a light engine. And this kid decided to go around the cars that were stopped for the gate. It was open crossing, flashing lights and bells, but no gates. He went around the cars that were stopped, and as he crossed right in the middle on the tracks, we hit him with the long end of a Jeep 38. The knuckle went right inside his side, the passenger door. He bounced off the knuckle, and we pushed him about maybe 150, 200 feet before we got stopped. And that was the first time I said, well, I don't want to come out here and kill people, and it took me a while to get my head straight. I was off for 2 weeks. I took 2 weeks off. Then this old engineer that I was with at the time, I was firing for, and another engineer called me at my house. We had a little chat, and he said, listen, kid, do you want to throw your $60,000 some odd dollars a year job out the window because some dope wants to kill himself? Or do you want to go flip hamburgers? I said, you better think about it. And I thought about it. I had a little chat with my father, and I made the decision. I said, well, it's part of the job. I spoke to enough senior folks at the time that says it's part of the job. And you're going to have to either take the heat or get out of the kitchen. So I stayed in the kitchen. And unfortunately, in my career, I killed 4 more. So I had a total of 5 kills. And I found several bodies. A couple of them were alive. A couple of them were missing parts. So that's the draw side. That's the dark side of our job. I mean, it's not all blowing the whistle and waving at people and, people getting flashed. That was another thing. I got flashed a couple times running freight trains. Some girl come out from out behind a sign. And I had my crew with me. I said, look at this. And she came on alongside the train and whoop, flashed me. I said, thank you, blew the horn. But there's good sides and bad sides. But the dark side, like I said, and all engineers, I'm sure, will agree with me. They'll remember their first one to the last one in vivid detail. And I can remember every kill, God forbid, every one that I had in vivid detail. That's the only drawback with my career, our craft. But it was part of the craft. It was part of the whole organization of mixing trains with grade crossings. And I came from a railroad. We had a lot of just crossbucks, open crossbucks. That's it. And we're 80-mile-an-hour railroad. We run bud cars over that. Blow and go, they said. And I killed one with a bud car, too. Only she ran into the side of me. I didn't hit her head on. But other than that, I don't want to talk about too much, but that was the dark side, the bad side. But the rest was made up for it. Good people to work with. We would cook on freight trains. When I was running freight trains, the conductor and the rear brakeman, they would start in the hack. They'd be cooking for lunch or whatever. We all chip in and they would grocery shopping, and come in the next day at work. And we would go to Beasley's Point Power Station with maybe 100, 125 cars of coal, 20 cars of oil. And by the time we got down there, it was lunchtime. So once we pulled all the train in, we come up on the siding next to the caboose, and we all sat down and had lunch. It was great. When we finished eating, everybody's happy. Then we would put the empties together and go back to Camden. It was great, wonderful. It was the best job I had. Was CM90, 91. Camden to Beasley's Point and back. I love that job. The point I'm trying to make is all the gang, all the crews, all the guys that work together were family. I don't know how else, what words I could use to express it. They're family. And I know that I could make a phone call to any one of those guys, including Mr. Springer. John, I need help. He'd be here in a heartbeat, as I would for him. That's how it goes. And I love it. And I miss it.
How about you, Charlie? What experiences stand out in your mind?
Well, I think my most, I don't want to say bizarre, the most unique story, and you probably won't be able to use this for anything. My first trip up the road, it was a week on the job, and my first road freight. It was a job they designated it CH3, which came out of Cedar Hill in New Haven. It was relatively new. It was a transfer job. It went from New Haven into the Bronx and then went up to Selkirk on the Hudson Division. And I was, like I said, I was on the job a week. So I get called for this job on a Saturday, 6:30 report in 72nd Street. So they got to cab us over to Oak Point Yard because 72nd Street's in Manhattan, and we're going to report over in the Bronx in Oak Point Yard. And the engineer, I'm not going to mention any names, but he's a fireman, but he's a qualified engineer. The New York Central had fireman runners. If you didn't have an engineer, you could use a fireman. The New Haven didn't allow fireman runners. You had to be set up to run a train. So we had a fireman runner as the engineer, and the crew was an upper end crew from Selkirk. They were returning back to Selkirk, but out of New York, you had New York engineers. So we report, and the cab company takes us over. And just to set the scene of what kind of day it is, the cab company was called Skulls Angels. So they pick us up. This is how the day starts, with a big old station wagon, and we head over into the Bronx, and we make a stop, and they said, well, we're gonna get our food now because CH3 can be a long journey. So we go over to the deli, and I go in, I get my sandwich and a big soda and some snacks, and I'm watching the crew, and we got two brakemen that are ancient. They're permanent brakemen. They never took qualification as conductors, so they're in there probably somewhere in their late 60s, the two of them. The conductor's he's probably got 30 years on the railroad, but he's in his late 40s probably. And he seemed to be a pretty knowledgeable guy. And the engineer's probably got 20 some odd years. He's like I said, fireman runner. And they're loading this back of the station wagon up with ice, bags of ice, a case of beer, food, snacks. I'm saying, where the hell are we going? So we go over to the Tower 3. That's where we pick up the train. And now it's about 8:30 in the morning. And finally the train rolls in about 10 a.m. and we get on a couple of big freight hogs, and we got 100 and I think 10 or 20 cars. Then off we go. And now, set the scene, we got to go through the Port Morris branch and across the Harlem division, around the Y at Mott Haven. And it's quite a journey, this train. So we finally get on the Hudson division, and off we go. And we get rolling. Now it's 140 miles up to Selkirk. We get to Hudson. The beer is all gone. We got the conductor and the brakeman up on the engine with me. I'm in the front seat. The brakeman's behind me, and the conductor's in the middle seat. No, I'm sorry, there's no seat. There was a couple of milk boxes. And we're going to stop at Hudson. We need to replenish our supply. So I'm taking this all in because I'm due. I don't know nothing. So they go up and get a couple more 6-packs. We're following an Amtrak, so nobody's questioning anything. So now we're getting close to Selkirk. The conductor has now taken over the running of the train because the engineer, he's shot. He's done. The brakeman behind me, he's in the seat like that. And I'm just saying to myself, this is what I got myself into here. So anyway, we go into Selkirk, and it's a, Perlman Yard, big deal at the time, And you got to go through a tunnel under the hump track, and so the conductor, he says, "Wake those guys up, get them going." And so we get up and they clean the cab out. So they're throwing the cans out the windows, and at the time, unknown to us, they throw the cans out and they hit a couple of guys that are standing around the track with the beer cans. So we get up to the north end where we tie up the train, and we have a whole reception committee waiting there. And we get off the train, and they get off, and I get off, and one of the guys in the suit says, "Who are you?" I tell him my name. I'm the fireman. He says, "How long you been here?" I said, "It's my first week." He says, "You run this train?" I says, "No, sir." I says, "I'm brand new." He says, "You do any drinking?" I said, "No." He says, "Get in the cab and go on home." And they took the whole crew out of service except me. I says, "Whew." And they hit the train master with the beer cans as they were coming in the. So that was my first experience, and I'll never forget it. I said, "Boy," and so this is how my career started. And I swore I would never ever drink on the job. But it's something that I remember to this day. And I said, "Boy, oh boy." And it was funny. The conductor ran the train, and I thought to myself, what do you need all the experience for when the conductor just sits down in the seat and takes over the train? And but I found out later on that everybody does the job, and it really wasn't all about computering. And when I finally qualified, it was just about getting out there and learning how to do it. Nowadays they want you on the simulator, they want you to do all of this stuff. No, it's just going out there and doing the job and learning it. You don't need to know all this fancy stuff. You just go out and put your hands on the throttle and learn how to do it. So I think that was my most memorable thing. And there was other, trying to think of some of the other good memories. I remember once running the Bud car to Dover. We come up to Patterson, and there was always a bunch of kids, nice kids, waving, and we give them a toot, And so one day there was a young woman there. She says, "You think you could give a couple of these kids a ride one day?" And I said, "Sure, put them on." So on a Saturday, we took 3 or 4 of them up to Dover Plains and back where we turned. We made a couple of round trips on the weekend. Turns out they had, I think it was cerebral palsy. They were kids out of a home. And a couple of the girls, they, 16, 15, and they were just in awe. It was like they had died and went to heaven. They just enjoyed it. We took them over to the little luncheonette in Dover and got them a soda at the counter. And so the next day, the girl come over, the nurse or whatever she was, she said, "Thank you." She just thanked us. And my conductor, Carmine, and I, it just made us feel so good that we were able to give them a nice outing, and it didn't cost us anything except for to buy them a soda or something. But it made us feel good, that we could do something. And so it was it's little things like that made the job worthwhile.
I'd like to say something before Rich has to go. And Charlie can, I'm sure, add to this. Rich, I'm going to talk about mentors. You must have had some.
Oh, yeah. Which one would you like to talk about?
The best.
Well, let's see. We had the guy who was half Indian. And I forgot I think it was Talbot. I don't remember his last name. but he taught me how to power brake. He says, whatever you do, kid, you be a power braking MF. He says, and don't listen to anybody else tell you how to run a train. You power brake. And he taught me how to do it. And it's a fine art. And as I'm sure all my colleagues will know, once you power brake, I mean, that's how you handle a train. And that's how I was taught. Good mentors. Another guy, Charlie Laird, who I used to fire for on his coal train I was telling you about earlier, CM 90, Cape May 90. He taught me how to run heavy coal trains and how to handle freights like that. And he says, when you do it, he says, you leave that automatic brake alone. Because when you run a train, you end up with several pieces of train. And he was an excellent mentor. So I had it, even though it was a small railroad compared to the other railroads, we had a lot of everything. We had passenger service, we had heavy freight, coal and oil trains, we had mixed freights, and these guys were artists. They were artists. They knew how to handle a train, and I watched them intently, and then I formulated my own style, as I'm sure most of the other guys did. And that's how I run a train. I got maybe 2 or 3 knuckles in my career, and it was mostly because of a popped air hose when I was running over the road freights after Conrail took over. But other than that, nobody ever carried a knuckle for me. And that's because I attribute that directly to the mentors that taught me how to run a train. And I respect them for that. I thank them for that. And consequently, it gave me a good career.
Rich, tell us what you mean when you say knuckle.
Couplers, the couplers, you know.
You said you got a knuckle or
Popped and broke it, parted the train.
one. Okay, I got you.
So it's easy to do if you mishandle the train or you're not aware of the topography of the area of land you're running over. You know, you got a lot of ups and downs. We got a long train, you got run-ins, run-outs. And if it catches at the right time, stretching and bunching, you're going to pop a knuckle. So it's up to the engineer to operate his train, knowing the topography and knowing how his train is handling to keep that train in one piece. You know, a lot of people, the guys say, oh, what do you drive a train? No big deal. You wave at people and blow the horn. I said, come take a ride with me. Let me show you a couple of things. And I took a guy for a ride with me. I had no idea. I said, it's more than just blowing the horn and waving at people. So I like to show people like that the job is not what you perceive it to be. And I'm sure other jobs that I look at that I don't know nothing about is not what I would perceive it to be. But a locomotive engineer comes with a lot of responsibility. The engineer's got to have a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of information. He's got to know his equipment right down to the wheels. Locomotives and troubleshooting, and I'm sure these guys understand what I'm talking about, especially when you run electric locomotives. There's all kinds of troubleshooting, buttons to press and fuses to reset. You got to know that because you're not going to break down there in the middle of the main line like on a Northeast Corridor and say, I'm broke down there, good, come and get me. You got to run through a lot of things, and I was involved in, when I was involved in training, involved in teaching the guys how to troubleshoot trains, how to troubleshoot locomotives. I also wrote, and I don't mean to be braggadocious, but I wrote a F40 troubleshooting card that was distributed throughout the system. How to troubleshoot F40s, and I'm talking about from top to bottom, HEPs, everything. So I was heavily involved in training for a period of time because I wanted to get involved. I lost a lot of money doing it, but this is where I met John. There was a lot of politics involved in Amtrak at the time. And you got a lot of people that are calling the shots that don't know a damn thing about running a train except around a Christmas tree at night. So I took it upon myself, even though I took it in the shorts financially, to get out there and spread the word that the engineer could understand. And John will verify this for me. I took all the political bullshit out of the topic, boil it all down to what was nice to know and what the engineer needed to know to keep his ass out of trouble. And that's what I dedicated myself. I only lasted 13 months in management, and I said, screw this, I'm going back to the tools. There's too much politics, too much backstabbing, too many people that didn't know nothing about a train calling the shots. And that made me nervous. So then I was called back to special duty by a road foreman out of Philadelphia. John knows him. was Carmen Palumbo. He said, I need somebody that's from the seat that knows how to boil this crap down or all this bullshit down to people like our engineers, so it's in an understandable form to keep themselves out of trouble. I said, okay, well, I'll give it a shot. And I did that for a while. And then when I worked that all out and it was all done, and I went back to the tools and stayed there until 2006, and I pulled the pin at 60, walked away, never looked back.
Charlie, how about you with mentors?
I think the only fellow that I really that gave me some, I guess, words of wisdom was our union rep. In the beginning, I belonged to the UTU. Forgive me, John. I'm sorry.
I was too. I was too.
We had a union rep, John McGrath. He was just a great guy, and a lot of guys didn't like his politics, but he cared for his men, and he just basically said, "Tell the truth, do the right thing, and keep your nose clean." And he always looked out for his men, and I respected him, and I tried to do that. Tried to be honest and just do the right thing, and I tried to be helpful as much as I could. I think back, like Rich said, some of these guys you just couldn't work with, and I was thinking of a story later on dealing with the dispatchers and all. We had some dispatchers that were just you're trying to work and you're taking orders from people that had no idea what they were doing.
Right.
And I'm thinking of one day I'm coming up on an equipment move from Grand Central to Brewster. And I come to the White Plains, and they got me lined into the yard. And I'm going to Brewster. And I'm calling the dispatcher. I'm saying, I'm going to use a number, 5897. Say, it's a number that designates the train's going to Brewster. And I said, coming to White Plains. Okay. And I'm trying to tip him off. He's got me lined for the yard. I don't want to let the guy know he's an idiot, Okay, I'm gonna 5897. I'm coming to North White Plains. Okay, I'm trying to tell him without making him seem stupid. 5897. I need the signal to go to Brewster. Okay, take the signal. He's got me lined for the yard. So finally, I took the signal and went in the yard. So I got to the yard signal, and I said 5897 to North White Yard. Where do you want me to go? He says, I want you to go to Brewster. I said, well, I'm trying to tell the guy. Now they got to put me in the yard and back me out. And I said, trying to work with a guy to be nice and not make him look like a moron. But this is what you get, So, this is what we wound up with towards the end. You just had people that didn't know how to run the railroad anymore.
That's right.
And, in fact, I had a friend that went into management. I never had any thoughts of going into management. My friend Gary Baker, I think John knows him, but he went into management with Metro North. He lasted 6 months, and he got so disgusted he flew back to Conrail and went to Amtrak. He said he couldn't believe how stupid it was in management. He said he just got so disgusted. He said, I got to get out of here. And he actually went to Amtrak and he finished his career with Amtrak. Then he got a little job out of Springfield.
I only lasted 13 months in management. I went back.
Yeah, well, he didn't even get that long.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so as far as getting back to mentors, I worked with guys that helped, but I wouldn't say I had anyone. And then my father was a conductor, and one thing I respected about my father, every day he went to work, tie, vest, and coat. Never once went to work looking like a slob. Right to the very last day he worked, because he worked 2 months at the Metro North and then he retired. But he never once went to work where they had to tell him to put his hat on. He always had his hat and his vest. He always looked sharp right to the last day he worked. They don't look like that anymore. But he didn't want me working on the railroad.
How about you, John? You brought up the subject of mentors, so you must have something in mind.
Yeah, excuse me. I was very fortunate. Something neither one of the guys talked about was passenger service also. But my first mentor was a fellow named Norris Myers, and I think you put his story in your trackside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And he taught me how to run a freight train. And he was an air brake supervisor for the New Haven Railroad. This man really knew his stuff. When you fired for people, whether it's on a freight or a passenger, that worked on steam, they knew as far as power braking went, less is better, because they came from the days where they had hot boxes. Today, everything is roller bearing journals. So you didn't want, and sticky brakes. So they learned how to do a lot of drifting. So you wouldn't go up to the curve and the speed was 45 and you're going 50 on a freight train and put the brake on. You notched off before you got there. Same thing with the passenger train. I fired for a guy named George Burr. He taught me how to run a passenger train to Boston. I would sit there with those old E8s and pull the throttle out to the 8th notch, boom, 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 and off I go. And then I'd go up to the curve and put the pieces. So he taught me how to notch off before you got there so that your train naturally slowed down. And at the end of the day, you were still on time. He said, this is how you do it. It's less wear and tear on the equipment. And these were guys that worked on steam, and because on the steam engine, the engineer using that brake, the fireman is going to work a lot harder to keep shoveling coal, to keep the steam up, to do all of this. So that's how they learned how to do that. And Rich, did you work with steam engineers when you hired out?
A couple, yes, a couple.
Yeah.
And what you just described is exactly how I was taught.
Right. Yep. And Charlie, did you work with steam guys on the Harlem and the Hudson?
Yeah, some. Yeah. Not too many on the Harlem, but on the Hudson there was some. But like I said, I didn't stay on the Hudson very long.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, the seniority was so much different on the Hudson and the Harlem.
Yeah.
There's, I mean, years difference. The Hudson, you had to be, you know, they were a lot older on the Hudson, so I couldn't hold on the Hudson for years. Where in the Harlem, I could go over and hold regular jobs because there were a lot younger seniority on there.
Yeah.
And but it was all, like I said, it was all passenger work. It was all commuter work. It was all different animal on the Harlem division.
But yeah,
they had engineers
that were very good mentors. A lot of the older guys were very good. And like Rich said, each guy taught you his way of doing it, whether you put the brake on here or there, a little earlier, a little later. And then the other guy would show you his way, and you put it all together. And there's not a lot of difference between it. You still got to use the throttle. You still got to use the brake. But you did pick up your own way. You did pick up your own way. Some guys could, balls to the wall, come into Grand Central with that bumping block, and they would have it, the slack all bunched up, and they would stop right before that bumping block, and my foot would be on the ground like I was pressing on the brake pedal. I was really scared. And they would bring it right to a stop, half a car length to the bumping block, and they would stop. I mean, there was no room for error. There's no room for error.
Guys were artists.
Yeah, they were. They really were. And I never learned to be that good. I didn't want to be that good. And I would, slow down a little earlier, and that's how I did it. But those mentoring on the railroad, that's how you learned. Today, you get a student, and I'm still friends. The 4 students that I had the longest, I'm still friends with them. And several of them I hear from quite a bit. Mm-hmm. And they still call me, they still talk with me, and they'll never forget what I put into trying to teach them. A big part, like they were talking about management, a big part of the problem was in the beginning, they didn't want to pay you anything to teach somebody. Well, when we hired out, you were firemen. And so you learn from these different engineers how to run the train. When Metro North and Amtrak came in, they got rid of the firemen. So now you have a guy that comes from train service or some other department, and they put them in a school, and then they put them out with real engineers for about a year and a half, and they expected you to teach for free. Gradually, then they gave us $10, which was $6 take home. Could you imagine teaching somebody your job for $6 and your license is sitting on the counter?
That's right.
You were not responsible if you made a rough stop. If they knocked the people down, that was okay. The engineer was not responsible. But if they ran a signal or they were speeding around a curve, that was my license for $6. So eventually they upped it to 20, which I said is now about $15 take home. So now my license is on the table for $15. These guys know what I'm talking about. Today it's an hour's pay. So when they didn't pay anything, or when they gave these minuscule amounts, a lot of engineers would take a student, they would teach him how to run the train, and you get these kids who could make 5 stops, pull into Penn Station, and they were a hero. I did it. When you questioned them, when you said, well, what do you do when the signals are out and you're running what's called manual block? That's place to place to place to place the whole trip. What speeds do you go? They were lost. They were lost. They learned in school, but they didn't learn how to apply it.
That's right.
Right? And you would ask other engineers, I'd say, well, you had this kid for 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 3 months. How come he doesn't know this? He says, John, like you say, they're giving me $6 or $12 when they gave us a raise to teach this guy. How much effort do you put into it for that kind of money? I teach him how to run the train. I don't have to teach him what to do when it's snowing outside. Rich ran down on the Jersey Shore. Charlie ran on the Hudson, along the Hudson River. I ran on the shoreline of Boston. Ask these guys what it was like in the fog. The first time I went to Boston on 66, which is an early morning job at 4 a.m. in the fog, and you can't see anything. And the engineer's going along, and he's blowing the horn, he's putting the brake on, he's slowing down, he's making his stops. I said, I'll never be able to do this. Never. And the engineers would tell you how to do it by looking out the side window and learning where the lights were and learning landmarks that you could always see out the side window.
That's right.
Right? And I'm sure Charlie had to run on the Hudson with that fog on the Hudson River. Same thing. And eventually you learn, because you don't see nothing in front of you. You know, in your car, when you drive it with the headlights on bright, you don't see nothing. But you can see out the side windows. And that's how you learn to run a train in the fog. And you would get train dispatchers that might call you and say, you lost 2 minutes. And this is in a dense fog. And you lost 2 minutes, and you'd laugh at them. To what Charlie was saying about train dispatchers. The towers are all gone. Before you were a towerman, and then you became a train dispatcher. So you had a clue as to what's going on. Now they teach them, and they think it's a Lionel train set.
Right.
That's all it is. These are toys on the track. I got these lights on my computer screen with a number. They don't realize that, a lot of them don't realize, oh, you got a diesel on that job, or he's got a 10-car train and the other guy's got a 5-car train, and how long it takes to get from A to B. Maybe I should give this guy a shot. And to what Charlie said about going in the yard, I don't know what Rich did, but I never wanted to hang a towerman or a train dispatcher. No. And I call him at New Rochelle. Amtrak has to go to the left to go down to Penn Station. And sometimes you'd be lined to Grand Central. So I would call the dispatcher on the radio, and he would answer me. And I'd say, this is 141, just wanted to say hello. And all of a sudden, the signal went red. And you'd watch your cab signal drop down. And he'd say, thank you. Just wanted to say hello. And they would let you in, or they'd reroute you. And that's how you didn't turn people in.
No.
You never tried to turn people in. But sometimes you'd get a guy like Charlie described who just didn't get it. He just didn't get it. So you would do what he wants. You know, when they did away with the firemen, my father was at North White Plains, and I was running out of North White Plains. And the bell would start to ring on the FL9, and I'd stop right in front of the tower and tie the whole interlocking up. He'd call me on the radio. Why are you stopped? I says, the bell is ringing in the cab. He says, could you clear the interlocking so I can let the train out of the yard? No, could be on fire. I don't have a fireman. I said this over and over and over again for years. I would stop and tie up the interlocking. I may have a fire on the engine. I don't have a fireman. I have to go back and see what's wrong. And that night at the dinner table, he'd say, why did you do that? And I tell him, they did away with the firemen. All I have is a warning bell. It doesn't tell you what the bell is. These
Right.
guys know. There's no telling what the bell is. So now you go back and find out what it is. And they would just say, the engineer said he had no firemen. You did away with the fireman. He's unneeded. So and the public got that idea too. When I was qualifying in '83, I'm learning the road from Brewster to Grand Central on the Harlem. And I bailed off as we pulled into Brewster real slow to go to the diner to go get coffee for the engineer and I. And a passenger on the platform said, what are you doing there? They got rid of the firemen. They don't have firemen anymore. And I smiled and I went over and I got the coffee. He didn't realize I'm an engineer learning the road. We got to Croton Falls, which is the first stop, and the steam generator died. The engineer says, did you want to go back and start that up? I said, no. And I told him what that passenger said to me. So I let them all freeze. And they froze.
Good.
Now you'll learn about what the firemen did. Now you'll learn. But they hire people, these guys were talking about management. Today, they think you got to have a college education. You don't need a college education. You need common sense. That's what you need.
And mechanical aptitude.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, those new trains, the Acela and everything, all of that equipment is all computerized. So you have to know how to do resets and things like that. It can be a real pain in the ass. Where on the old equipment, you banged on the relay box. You bang on it with the shoe paddle, and it would go click, 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 and come in, and off you would go. But today it's a lot different. It's a lot different.
Excuse me, gentlemen. Yep. I'm going to have to leave. I hope I didn't upset anybody's apple cart, but I got a dog I got to take care of.
Take care of Blue.
Yeah, because I got to get her to the vet. This is important. So thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Everybody else, have a good day, safe day, and let's do this again.
Okay. Take care.
Okay.
I know. Bye.
As far as good things on the job, like Charlie was talking about, conductors cooking in the caboose, I experienced that. That was a lot of fun. Going to Selkirk or going to New York on a passenger train, you have a little bit of a layover. You'd go out to get a meal together and talk and stuff like that, have a little fun with that, whether it be Boston. Something we didn't touch on was holidays. We all spent a lot of holidays. I tell people on the outside when they tell me how much I'm enjoying life, that I've been retired now 10 years. I said, for 42 years, I can honestly say I probably worked 30, maybe 33 Christmases and all the major holidays, because I didn't have that day off. The train I was on ran. So you go to Boston on Christmas with your crew, and the only place open is Chinatown. So you all go to Chinatown. Same thing going to New York. We would go to Chinatown, get a bite to eat, or you bring your own food. That's how you spent Christmas. New Year's Eve, going to Boston. You made good money, but you were working on the holiday while your wife was at home, your spouse was at home. These guys with children, leaving their kids, they grow up. You know, my mother raised my sister and I, because my father had Tuesdays and Wednesdays off, and he worked 2 jobs. And he worked 4 to 12 on the railroad. That's the way it was. We sacrificed a lot for our pensions, yet everybody seems to think that it was handed to us.
Yes, speaking of that, I was dating a girl that I had to work, and she wanted to do something. I said, well, I work Tuesday through Saturday, so I can't do it. And she says, you work on Saturday? I said, did you ever take the train to the city on the weekend? She said, yeah. I said, well, who do you think runs those trains? And she couldn't understand. And I said, there's people that work to make those trains go on Saturday and Sunday when you are off. She looked at me and I said, well, I work on the railroad. You know that. She just couldn't comprehend that there was people that did that stuff. You know, I work on the railroad. So yeah, I have, somebody has to do that, you know. Oh, I didn't understand that, you know. People don't realize that, you know, they take that for granted, you know. They don't think of that.
When you hire out on the railroad, Charlie and Rich know this, you're on the spare board. You're on call 24/7. They call you 2 hours before they want you. Figure that for a life. And if something happens at 10 o'clock at night and you didn't think you were going to go to work until 6 o'clock in the morning and a train breaks down or a guy gets sick and he books off on his job, now you get the call and you go in without any sleep. And that's how you run the train, without any sleep. That's the way it is on the railroad. That's the way it is. There were times my wife and I, you'd go to the movies, you know, before cell phone, before the beeper. You'd go to the movies, you'd tell the guy outside, this is the seat I'm sitting in inside. The railroad has your number. If they call looking for John Springer, please come in and get me. And that happened, where they would have to come in. I'd be sitting at the seat near the door, tap me on the shoulder. I'd go out, take the call, because you had 2 hours to get to work. And it would work. We had people we'd go out with, and I'd say, if the railroad calls, I got to go to work. And some people got pissed off at that, and some people would understand. But and when you're in train and engine service, that's your life. That's the way it is, till you hold a regular run. And even then, people sit there and say, what do you mean you got to go home at 8 o'clock? I got to take a nap. I got to go to work at midnight. I got to take a nap. You work at midnight? Yeah, I work at midnight. Yeah, I work at midnight. There's a train that runs at midnight. I go to work at midnight. Some people don't understand those things.
Fascinating career, I think, over the years. Do you think you would be, how would you feel about being employed by the railroad the way they are now?
I don't know what anybody's ever said to Charlie, but I've had numerous people. I've been out 10 years. In the beginning, they would tell me, John, you'd make it about a week and you'd be fired because of your mouth. Today, they tell me I'd be gone in a couple of days because we have sensitivity training, which I didn't do very well at. And you have to be sensitive. And they have cameras and microphones in the locker room. So you go into a locker room today and everybody's sitting there looking at their telephone. They don't talk. And if they do, they talk in a low tone. Charlie remembers the days where you'd walk into a locker room and people say, hey, you know, and yell and scream, curse at each other, laugh about it, joke around. Today, no matter what you say, it's wrong. We work with a lot of sensitive people that take everything in the wrong light. So, no. I don't miss running trains. I had a very good time. I loved it. I did it for 42 years. I did it for 5 more years for the Naugatuck Railroad. Now I volunteer at a Switch Tower Museum, and I describe what life was like in a tower from 1896 until they closed it up in 1998. That's a lot of fun. That's enjoyable. But no, I don't think I'd want to do it anymore. There's a lot going on out there. All these safety devices they put on, because today they hire people off the street and through different avenues. You see very little of where they hire family. And the thing about nepotism that's really good is, if you're Ed Fuller's son, if I tell Ed Fuller how you're doing, that you're a screw up or you did something stupid, you're going to be pissed off. So you didn't misbehave. You did your job, because word got back, whether it was a father or an uncle, word got back. And that tended to make better railroad employees. And a lot of us that were around for a long time agree with that.
Charlie, would you go back?
Well, we were actually just talking about this the other day. And my thought was, I always liked running trains. I hated the company because they got to be just, you're working with idiots, for idiots. I wouldn't say working with idiots. The management was terrible. But the only way I mean, I've been out 15 years. I don't think I would want to go back now, but I would have thought about it if we could go back part-time. I wouldn't go back and work 5 days a week. But if they said you could come back and work 1 or 2 days a week, I might have thought about it. Because there's no reason to go back and work 5 days a week now. I mean, we have a good pension and I'm enjoying my life. So I would have said I'd go back and work 1 or 2 days a week if they needed somebody. But I have a friend that and I'm not going to mention his name. John probably will figure it out, but I could never work under these conditions today. I said, well, first of all, if you were a new guy or a young guy, you wouldn't know because you never would have worked under the old conditions. So if you were a young fella today, this is what, and you were a rail buff or you were interested in the railroading, this is all you would know because this is what you're visualizing. You wouldn't have seen that it was in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. You wouldn't have known railroading. You would have seen history, you would look at videos, but this is current. This is today. The kids today, the model railroaders, I mean, this is what they see. They see the modern engines and they see the modern trains. So like the young people that are hiring on the railroad, oh, they're all gung ho because this is today's railroading. So if you wanted to get a job on a railroad today, oh, this is what you would do. But to go back, yeah, I mean, it's not what we know. But I will say I always enjoyed running trains. I can't say I didn't. The equipment's different though. You don't have much control over the equipment anymore. When the signal changes, the brakes go on automatically on the equipment now. So you don't even have to do much. You know, you push the button, acknowledge the signal, and the brakes go on. So it's like it's almost like you're not needed. It makes you feel less needed in the cab. So then they got places they want you to. They got signs. So put the brakes on here and stuff. You don't need a brain anymore. Almost. So, but anyway. So I put my time in, and we're enjoying life now.